Today I'm going to present what is the extension of my master's thesis, and in my thesis I performed a comprehensive large-scale study on email confidentiality and integrity mechanisms in the wild. As you may know, SMTP servers greet each other with an extended hello, but our study shows that the email ecosystem is rather an extended hell. So to get everyone on the same page, I want to start with an overview on the evolution of email security mechanisms. To combat spam and phishing, we want sender authentication, a sender domain authentication. And SPF is the oldest mechanism for that. The recipient simply fetches a list of IP addresses allowed to send emails from the sender domain's DNS. Unfortunately, SPF is not compatible with some forms of email forwarding. But we have DKIM as a competing mechanism which does not suffer from the forwarding problem. It signs emails with a per-domain cryptographic key that the recipient can fetch from the DNS. But both mechanisms do not necessarily need to authenticate the emails from header that is displayed by most user agents. This is why we need DMARC. So if a DMARC record is present, one of the mechanisms must actually produce a pass result for that domain. But we also want encryption between MTAs. The oldest mechanism for that is StarTLS, which provides opportunistic encryption. Unfortunately, StarTLS stripping is a well-known and simple attack. This is why DaneTLSA has been invented. With DaneTLSA, the receiver publishes information about the certificate in their DNS zone, which is secured by DNSSEC. This information can then be used by the sender to verify the authenticity of the certificate. Because DNSSEC is complex to deploy, there has also been MTA-STS, which is a newer but weaker protocol. And MTA-STS works similar to HTTP strict transport secrecy, but for email. But we do not always want to trust infrastructure providers. This is why we sometimes want end-to-end encryption. And while OpenPGP is known to solve the encryption part, Dane bindings for OpenPGP keys are supposed to solve the key distribution part. One basically hashes the local part of an email address and fetches the OpenPGP key from the recipient's secure DNS. This works similarly with Dane bindings for SMIME certificates. So having dealt with the background, I would like to present the methodology of our study. First, we have provider scope tests. For these tests, we created accounts with 47 providers. We then have inbound scenarios, that is, we send emails from our test server setup to our provider accounts. We introduce various SPF, DKIM, and DMARC misconfigurations to check whether the providers deliver emails in insecure scenarios in which they should actually reject our emails. Then we also have outbound scenarios. In these, we send emails from the providers to our test server setup with various DaneTLSA, DNSSEC, and MTA-STS misconfigurations. Regarding the large-scale part of our study, we perform domain scope tests for the top 10 million domains. That is, we measure SPF, DMARC deployment, MTA-STS deployment, and OpenPGP key and MIME-A deployment. Last but not least, we also perform MX scope tests. That is, we measure StarTLS and DaneTLSA deployment across unique MX domains from the dataset we use for the domain scope tests. So regarding the provider scope tests, the slide shows a few select providers and how they deal with various scenarios. A green circle in the table means that a provider made a secure choice in a specific scenario. And only a few providers provide near satisfying security. Gmail is unsurprisingly one of them. For Sapo, we can, for example, see that it does not reject emails in the first scenario, yet it rejects email in the second and third scenarios. The reason is that it simply does not support DMARC. That means if you want to protect your own domain, you still need to implement security mechanisms that are predating the stronger ones. For Zoho, you can see that the emails are correctly rejected or quarantined as expected in the first three scenarios, indicating support for DMARC. Nevertheless, it let our emails through in one of the double from scenarios where one from header perfectly passes the DMARC check, while the other one is configured to not pass the DMARC check. This potentially allows for UI mismatches in clients which display the from header, which did not pass the DMARC check. So you may know that DMARC has a subdomain policy which allows to specify how to deal with subdomains. In case of Tutanota, this implementation is flawed by not taking into account the subdomain policy. On top of that, there are providers like Vodafone. They let all our emails through, no matter how misconfigured our server was, hinting at the use of a proprietary filter or the lack of a filter. So having looked at the sender domain authentication, now let us look at encryption. In our provider-scoped experiments, we investigated 46 providers. Of those 46 providers, 43 support StarTLS outbound. That is, they make use of StarTLS if the receiving MTA offers it. But only 13 providers request a TLSA record. And for one provider, the TLSA record does not even imply StarTLS, meaning that StarTLS stripping is still possible, although the provider implements DANE TLSA. So although it might be intuitive to assume that DANE TLSA implies StarTLS, it does not, and there's an extra RFC that deals with just that. But all providers allow for unencrypted outbound email if the recipient does not use DANE TLSA. And the 43 providers that support StarTLS will accept invalid certificates. Having seen the provider scope results, the question is, why do so many providers send emails to servers with invalid certificates? And the simple answer is 30% of certificates simply fail validation. 28% of all certificates fail because of a hostname mismatch. And there's a share of 22% of certificates that fail because only their hostname mismatches, other errors excluded. Then we have errors like missing certificates in the chain, expired certificates, self-signed certificates, and those are rather negligible from the amount. So email providers have to allow unencrypted outbound email for utility. The good message is, in times of let's encrypt, that should be rather easy to fix. So now the question is, how can we transmit emails securely between MTAs? Each MX record should have a TLSA record. In our top 10 million domains, we find roughly 2.5 million MX records. Of those, only 9,500 have at least one TLSA record. But the TLSA record also has to be protected through DNSSEC. And this leaves us with only 8,400 servers. And when we now connect to these servers, we can still filter out those servers that present a certificate not matching the TLSA record. And now we are down to 8,200 servers responsible for 170,000 domains. But we also have the requirement that the domain's MX record itself must be protected by DNSSEC. Otherwise, a man in the middle can just replace it, right? So adding that requirement, we are down to 71,000 domains out of 10 million domains that can really benefit from TLSA, given that the sender implements it, of course. So regarding end-to-end encryption, we looked at OpenPGP key and SMIME, and in particular, the key strength used. So to be able to perform a large-scale measurement, we used DNS empty non-terminals to find domains that potentially support these mechanisms. Empty non-terminals are basically a DNS feature which enable our measurement. If a child label exists, the parent label may not return an X domain status. So we basically look whether the OpenPGP subdomain returns no error, and if not, the domain is likely to use OpenPGP key mechanism, unless we have wildcard domains. So for wildcard domains, our method does not work. So if we encounter NSEC-enabled zones, we can immediately measure the key strengths of the published keys because we can walk the zone. For NSEC 3, we have built a custom hashcat module for cracking zones using combinations of common first and last names and word lists. So we ended up with acknowledging that the adaptation of these mechanisms is relatively low. We only find 100 OpenPGP key and 26 SMIME supporting zones. And most of these belong to well-known entities in the tech community, such as the ISC, Debian, or the Fedora project. And if we now look at the keys we found, we immediately see that the second most common key type is 1024-bit DSA, which is known to be insecure. So to conclude the talk, we all use email every day, yet it suffers from severe deficiencies which have been solved by alternative protocols such as Matrix. Providers lag behind in the implementation of security checks. For example, only 7 out of 46 providers support DANE TLSA, while all allow outbound connections that are unencrypted. Also, the ecosystem shows that TLS certificates are not well managed. We also have the problem of the complexity of DNSSEC. We have a plethora of retrofitted security protocols and the fact that both ends have to support those protocols, and this is a major hindrance to email security. And while automated end-to-end encryption using OpenPGP key and SMIMA is possible in theory, we discover implementation weaknesses in military applications and a German security-focused email provider. So if you are interested in more information, for example, about SPF or MTA STS, please check out our paper. And with that, I'm happy to take on your questions. Thank you.